One of the biggest issues facing the U.S. pet care industry today is a shortage of veterinarians and veterinary technicians. On this episode of WNIN Newsmakers, we'll talk to experts about the impacts a shortage of veterinarians can have on both animal well-beings as well as our own agriculture and farming community. According to the USDA, in 2023, the shortage of veterinarians has reached an all-time high. Here to discuss some of the challenges faced by this shortage is Dr. Julie Gray, head of veterinarian at Davis County, Kentucky Animal Shelter. Julie, thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, thank you.
Well, first I want to go over some of the consequences of the veterinarian shortages for both small pets and large pets. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, it does affect every aspect. So I get these calls all the time, and I'm not in private practice anymore. I'll have friends or family contact me, say they can't get into their vet. Well, they can't get in their vet because they're so overworked right now, especially after COVID. The numbers of veterinarians having enough staff has dropped drastically, but the pet population continues to increase, and they just haven't been able to keep up. So it may be weeks before you can get your sick pet in, and then owners are panicking at what to do because they don't want their loved one to get sick or be hurting.
Right. Are there any specialties that are seeing more of an effect with this shortage? If it's exotic pets, or are cats and dogs suffering more? What are you seeing?
Well, I'm seeing obviously more the shelter side because that's where I'm at. However, I do know that the large animal is definitely affected probably the most. But as far as the sector of veterinary medicine, probably emergency care is most affected. Just trying to find veterinarians to staff that is the biggest shortage. And the second one is animal shelters. They're having a lot of trouble getting their animals seen or having a veterinarian to be able to work with them to see the animals in their care.
Dr. Gray, can you elaborate on some of the specific challenges that come up specifically in rural areas because of this shortage?
Yeah, so basically, I hate to keep saying it over and over, there's just not enough veterinarians out there. I believe in Kentucky, I looked and there is around 1,100 practicing veterinarians, and that's it in Kentucky. And only 3% of those are doing large animals. So there's just so many millions of cattle farms that need a vet, and they just can't get access to it.
We're talking about farmers now. Do you know of any of the challenges that farmers face when large animal care isn't really necessarily in their reach?
Right. So if they can't get a veterinarian out there, they're looking into trying to handle it themselves, and that's just not going to be in the best interest of those animals. And so if the animals aren't able to pull through whatever crisis that they're in, if you're losing more animals because of the lack of vet care, that's eventually going to affect the industry. It's their livelihood, so prices are going to have to go up.
Absolutely. And, we're talking about all these challenges that the shortage can affect. We're talking about not only livestock and farmers, but eventually down the line, this veterinarian shortage could also maybe impact the country's food supply if we're looking that far down the line. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so basically the food supply will be impacted by again, the prices are probably going to go up because it's going to cost more for these farmers to be able to get care to their animals, or they're going to lose more animals in the process of not having that veterinary care. Also, if veterinarians are too busy to be doing their job as well as they could, just because they're so overworked and so many long hours, there's things that can slip through the cracks. And so, there's a potential for bacteria to get into the meat or something like that, and cause some safety issues as well.
And Dr. Gray, this is obviously a stressful period or a topic for families or just really any pet owner, but also for the vet techs and the veterinarians that are working in places like where you're at right now. Can you talk to me about some of those stress factors that you all see?
Yes, absolutely. So that's a big one. I think more private practitioners are actually leaving the field of veterinary medicine due to this crisis because they can't keep up. Therefore, clients are getting so upset. They're upset with the staff. There was a shooting in Kentucky at a vet clinic. I personally, just a few weeks ago, had someone threaten to kill my kids when a pet didn't do well with surgery. So, it's just a lot of stress, a lot of hours worked. And unfortunately, the pay doesn't always keep up with that and make it worth it.
Obviously, Dr. Gray, that's terrible. No one should ever have to deal with those kind of conversations and understanding the stress that's coming with all of this. I mean, do you guys ever bounce around solutions? Like, because I know this is very difficult. It's not an easy solution, because if there was, we would implement it, right? But
Right.
how can we all work together to try and find a solution? What's out there to even be offered as a solution?
Right. So it's definitely been in discussions for several years now to try to get more veterinary students into vet schools and try to possibly forgive veterinarian student loans or make incentives to go into large animal medicine. All those things are going to take a while. So unfortunately, being patient, being kind, that's the biggest thing that you can do to help your veterinarian right now. And hopefully they'll stay in practice.
Well, is there anything else that you'd like to add in terms of the vet tech veterinarian shortage that you would like people to know, or how people can help, the community can help?
Well, we did not talk about animal shelters specifically. So maybe we can touch base with that. I do think it has affected the veterinary shortage has affected animal shelters as well, because if they're not getting in to be spayed or neutered, they're actually multiplying. And so again, that's adding to the pet population, adding to the problem, adding to the shelter crisis, because nobody wants to see these dogs be euthanized.
Right.
So shelter workers are overworked and stressed and compassion fatigue. So if everyone can do their part, spay or neuter the pet, be kind to the veterinarian, and hopefully have a little patience when you can and understand that everybody's trying the best they can and we all want the best for the animals.
Absolutely. Dr. Julie Gray, thank you so much for spending time with us. We know you're busy, so we appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Due to an increased cost in veterinary care because of the current high demand of vets and vet techs, many shelters and boarding houses are filling up rapidly. Here to discuss the community impact of this is Amanda Coburn, Advancement Director of Vandenberg Humane Society, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, there's a lot to talk about here. I mean, we were just having a great conversation before this started, so I want to get into all of this. But first, I want to start with the struggles, because there are a lot of things that maybe people aren't thinking of if we're thinking about vet shortages and just the vet care shortages. What struggles do shelters and boarding houses see because of this?
Sure. We've been struggling for about the past couple years with significant pet overpopulation. People might remember, like you said, during the pandemic in 2020 and 2021, things were great in sheltering. The pets were flying out the door. They were getting adopted left and right. It was a fantastic time to be in animal welfare. And then at some point around early 2022, we have basically just hit a wall with adoptions. And that's a nationwide trend. That's not just here locally. There are just so many pets who are needing homes. And it's really not pandemic pets being returned. I want to make that clear first and foremost. Most of those people have kept their pets. But as we return to normal life, people are hesitating to get additional pets, and the economy and veterinary care being the main factor in that is driving people to not want to get more pets, which is really impacting us, and it's making it hard to find placement for these animals.
You just brought up some of probably your answers for this question, but what does this mean for the community, generally speaking?
Sure. It really just means that we have more pets languishing in our shelters for longer. We're still doing okay with puppies and kittens. A lot of people, those have always been the most easy to adopt, right? But one of the biggest problems right now is actually large dogs, which previously it had been many years since we'd had issues adopting out large dogs. Our facility, Evansville Animal Care and Control, a lot of our local rescues, all of our organizations have really, really great dogs, and lots of other animals too, just sitting here for a longer period of time because they're just taking longer to find homes. So I think the impact overall is going to be more euthanasia for space, which is never what any shelter wants to have to experience. And we're really struggling finding placement for that, which then culminates in a whole other host of issues, such as staff retention. You know, nobody wants to be an animal control officer or a shelter worker if the animals aren't finding homes. So it's a very multifaceted, complicated issue for sure.
Absolutely. And I don't want to talk about all shelters or boarding houses, but so I'll talk about Vandenberg Humane Society specifically. How do you guys navigate solutions? You know, we're hearing all these problems, but how do you guys go about, okay, this is how we can try and tackle this problem?
Sure. The first and foremost one that we've done for many years already, of course, is spay and neuter. The fewer pets who need homes, the fewer pets will need vet care later in life, which will then help with the backlog of veterinary care. So first and foremost, getting as many pets fixed as we possibly can. Puppies, kittens, older animals, anything we can get our hands on, we always say we will fix it. A couple other solutions that we are looking at, and just in general that the nation is looking at, is pet insurance. There's really been a lot of resurgence in that market over the last few years. Even more human-centric companies such as State Farm and Progressive and places like that are offering pet health insurance. Works very similar to human health insurance. You just have a policy that you pay a nominal amount for, and then it'll help with medical costs. And then we're looking at what other services can we add to our adoptions, to our adopted animals, to prevent people from having to get that done later. Like, for example, one of the big needs here locally is dental care. Pets need their teeth cleaned, usually as they get older. Sometimes they need extractions in their teeth. It can affect things like them not eating. They have a lot of pain, therefore their temperament can change. So we are examining, you know, in the future, could we add dental care to our host of things that we offer and is included in the adoption fee. Things like making sure that we inform people about pet insurance at the time of adoption. And then just trying to be supportive of our adopters after they leave our facility. There's a really sad example that I think I was telling you about earlier. We had a woman who adopted a cat from us in early December, and everybody thought all was well. He seemed healthy, and we had no issues at all. And less than a month later, he was experiencing some urinary issues, which can be common in male cats, and he was an older cat. So unfortunately, he got worse right around Christmas Eve. And of course, as a shelter, we don't have an emergency capability for emergency services. Right. Our veterinarian, our full-time vet, does spay and neuter Monday through Friday, a full day of surgery, and we don't have another veterinarian on staff that's available in the evening. So we were not open, and she ended up spending $2,300 to get her cat treated pretty much on Christmas Day, and she had to drive him to Clarksville, Tennessee to get that done because she could not get him care here in Evansville. So it's just awful. The whole situation's awful. The availability of care, the cost of care, they're just huge barriers for people.
It's a really terrible example, but a really good example of the problem that we are seeing here locally. Now I want to go over maybe if there are families watching and they're having trouble finding the right care because of the vet tech shortage, what options do families have available to them?
Sure. There's not really an easy, quick solution. What we would always recommend is, number one, get a new patient appointment as soon as you can. Right. So oftentimes there's a very long wait, just like there is sometimes with certain human aspects of care. So as soon as you get a pet, go ahead and get that appointment somewhere. Even if there's nothing wrong yet at this point, you're more likely to be accommodated and seen if you're an established patient at a clinic. And then be mindful of where other emergency clinics are in our region or outside of our region, because unfortunately we have had to refer people to those clinics when our local emergency clinic is not open. Clarksville, Tennessee, for example, Louisville, Nashville, even Indianapolis. Just know where those emergency clinics are have those numbers handy and establish relationships with as many vets as you can get into.
And obviously, if families or if there's someone out there struggling to find care for their animal, it's going to take a toll on them. But those aren't the only people affected by that. So what about the toll that it takes, whether that's physical and emotional tolls on animal care providers as well, just trying to treat all these animals and just not having the time to do it because they're one person?
Sure, yeah, that's a huge problem in the veterinary field. You can look up, if you just Google veterinary suicide rates and mental health issues in the veterinary field. It's a massive problem. In fact, there are entire nonprofits that exist solely for the purpose of providing mental health support to veterinarians, because since care has gotten so expensive, what they hear a lot sometimes is, you're just in it for the money. You don't care about my pet. If you really cared, you'd be open all the time. Things that this one specific person cannot help. There's so many issues. Vets can't work, 23 hours a day. They have to be able to sleep. They have to be able to have time off, So it really plays a big role. And shelter workers too, my team at the Humane Society is really struggling with seeing, and talking to people on the phone who are just crying and sobbing and can't, don't know what to do. I answered a call from someone who had a pet who was experiencing an emergency. They could not get into our local clinic here, and they had to drive to Louisville, but they called me back a few hours later because I said, keep me updated, let me know if we can help. And their pet passed away on the ride over to Louisville because
like, what more can you do?
Right,
They tried everything they could.
And there's nothing that we can do to help people. So it's very emotional because there's just so much more demand than there is supply, depending on what you're needing. Like, maybe if you need vaccinations, there's plenty of options. But if your pet's sick or your pet needs specialty care or emergency care, there's really limited options.
Amanda, real quick before we wrap up here, I do just want to ask, in terms of the Vandenberg Humane Society, how can the community help alleviate, if they even can alleviate some of this pressure?
Sure. We're doing the best we can to help get pets care in the early stages, so like preventative and wellness care, because at the very least, even if we can't help with the emergency aspect of things, we want to make sure your pets are fixed, vaccinated, have microchips, and are on monthly prevention for heartworm, fleas, ticks, things of that nature. So we are really looking for partnerships, especially with people like donors and funders in the community who are interested in this kind of work. If you are at all interested in partnering with us to help make a big impact in this area, again, spay and neuter, outreach, access to care, definitely get in touch with me because we have lots of opportunities in that area.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
There are only 33 accredited veterinary schools in the U.S. Here to provide more information about the challenges in the veterinary field of education is UE Professor Noah Gordon. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So I kind of want to go over exactly what I was just talking about. Why is there a veterinarian shortage? If there's only 33 accredited schools, that seems crazy.
It is. It's very competitive. There are a couple issues here. One is that there is a veterinary shortage in certain kinds of vets, right? So there's the companion animal vets that most of us are familiar with for your dogs and cats and such. And there's a small shortage there, and a few percent, 5-6% maybe, projected to be an issue there. But really most of the issue in lack of veterinary care is in rural vets, particularly for large animal vets. So farm animals, there's some concern in vets for horses, but really food animals, agricultural production is really where there's a much more drastic veterinary shortage there, even though that's a much smaller percentage of the total number of vets.
What could that mean in terms of food supply or just down the line? What could be the outcome there?
Well, certainly there could be a reduction in food production. One issue in rural communities, a lot of rural communities have smaller farms, smaller agricultural operations. Those are going to be harder to they're going to have a harder time getting vets at smaller agricultural operations. The big ag, big farm is going to be able to hire their own vets and have people on call a little more, whereas the small farmers, I've read some stats that in some areas there's like one vet serving like 4 or 5 counties in parts of the U.S. and like parts of Kentucky even. There's some areas in our area where there's only one vet that has to travel around to these areas, or only a few vets to cover huge areas.
So let's say there's a student out there, they're expressing interest, they want to become a veterinarian, a vet tech, or something in this field here. Just like a lot of fields, there are barriers you need to cross, but specifically for these students looking to get into this field, what kind of academic or even financial barriers are they going to be experiencing?
So there are academic challenges. It's very competitive to get into vet school. It's harder than even getting into medical schools. The plan for getting into med schools is a little more outlined, so it's a little clearer for students there, but veterinary schools are a little more independent. There is an overarching body that runs, or that provides guidelines, getting all the classes you need, getting good grades in those classes. It's very challenging coursework. Acceptance rates for vet schools are in the nature of about 8%. So it's probably one of the most selective schools, professional types of schools in the country, honestly.
When we talk about these challenges, are there any initiatives or even solutions or trying to be formed aimed at attracting more students to these universities, or even getting more universities accredited to become a school to kind of make that 33 number go up?
There are, I think there's 2 or 3 new vet schools coming on online soon. Clemson, South Carolina is one coming online soon. And I've seen reports of between 10 to 12 new schools that are in the planning stages. Whether they all become vet schools in the end, I can't say, right? I mean, they have to get through the whole process. But it's obviously not something that you can just say we're going to build a new vet school and start it next year. It takes time to hire lots of professors. You need lots of lab space and lots of medical equipment, of course, animal care facilities, which all costs a lot of money. So starting a vet school is not, something that just happens quickly.
Yeah, not a snap of your fingers type of thing. Is there let's put this in perspective here. Let's say there's a local student that wants to maybe stay close to home, but they're exploring the idea of being a vet or going into this field. Do you know the closest school that would be one of the accredited universities?
Well, Purdue
is
the only one in Indiana right now. So yes, we send students to Purdue all the time. Mizzou, University of Missouri is popular as well, but we've sent students to, there's a new school, like a Memorial in Tennessee, and I have a student now who's interested in Colorado. Colorado State has a great veterinary program. So, I mean, students get around basically because options are limited, right?
Right. What are some of the different levels of veterinarian care that students may receive an education in once they actually get into those schools?
So I try and encourage students a lot to consider the different kinds of veterinary care, particularly because I know the shortage of large animal vets. So I encourage them to get experience with large animal vets. There's a few in the area that sometimes do take UE students to do internships or to do some shadowing. But I also encourage students to get some exposure. We have Mesker Park Zoo here, which is a tremendous resource, and their vets have been very open to our students coming and shadowing with them as well. It's not a career that students often think about, zoo veterinary care, but it's important, right? Of course, all the zoos need vets all the time, and that's a very different kind of job, taking care of different kinds of animals. Most, of course, still want to stick with companion animals, and they think of dogs and cats and things like that. But even those are expanding. If you're a companion animal vet, there's a lot of people that now keep, pet snakes or lizards or things like that. Yeah. So having a little more diverse background can only help you.
Yeah. As a professor, how do you keep your students encouraged to continue on into this field?
You have to think about all the options that are out there and help the student try and figure out what options are available, right? So sometimes it's not veterinary the veterinary profession is not right for students. Or sometimes students need to take a step back and they think, well, okay, I want to be a vet, but maybe being a vet tech is a better work-life balance for them or a better choice given their abilities. Sometimes there are other careers related in support industries that might be available to them that they might be better off getting into. But really, it's just about encouraging them and recognizing they have the ability, that they're smart people, they're in college for a reason.
Okay.
So,
Well, Professor Noah Gordon, thank you so much for joining us.
all right. Well, thank you.
Thanks to all of our guests for explaining how important our veterinarians are to our local communities and farms. Thanks for watching WNIN Newsmakers.